Hi there. Welcome back to Tuesday's Tips. I'm Greg Kaiser, and in this weekly feature, I've been kind of delving into some of the image editing tools that are available to you through programs such as Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, same thing within Photoshop, but most of what I'm doing applies to all image editors that you might be using. And this is definitely not a deep dive, although I am kind of taking the time to kind of delve into each aspect of it, and this is by no means end-all be-all of image editing. It's just designed to get you started. Most of the videos that I've found out there are for folks that are already relatively proficient at image editing, and I wanted to kind of get something out there so that if you are just getting started, you can learn everything from just basic global edits into color correction, color grading, and some local adjustments as well. And I wasn't real sure what I was going to do this week. I've been toying with the idea of working with the brush tool, but there's just so much to that. I don't know exactly how I want to handle that just yet, and I also need some good example pictures. So I'm not going to do that just yet, but I did just get back from doing some photos this morning, and one of the ones that I shot gave me the idea for this Tuesday's Tips that I'm wanting to do, and it's stitching a panoramic image. It's fairly simple, fairly straight, self-explanatory, but if you've never done it, it's something that is probably going to feel a little nerve-wracking for you and not real sure how to go about doing it. So we're going to dive into that today. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Lightroom, and we should be seeing that right now. And just keep in mind, I have just uploaded these pictures. There has been nothing done to them short of importing them into Lightroom. So what I've done, you can kind of see the film strip down here at the bottom. These are the different photos that I shot. This series right here in the red is what's going to be my pano. Now, the trick to doing this is, number one, make sure that the camera is level, make sure it tracks level. And what that means is when you go from left to right, or it can be right to left, it doesn't matter, everything stays on target, so you don't shoot at an angle. If your tripod is sitting wonky, you're going to end up with a weird sloped image. So what we do, we overlap about a third of the way. So we've got this first frame here that I shot, and really it's nothing. Composition is nothing important or anything, but it's going to build together. The next shot that I did, I just moved the lens a little bit to the right, and if you can see where that kind of reddish tree is over on the left-hand side, if I move back to the original one, that is on that third line. On that first shot. So there's an overlap. The overlap is important because that is where the program, and in this case it's Lightroom, can figure out how to put these images together. It's called stitching them together. So that was my first image. Second image there. I moved over again to about a third out of the frame. That's my third image. We're starting to introduce the subject. Now this is what I actually focused on. I left the focus locked. You don't want to do autofocus and have it refocus every time. So you set your focus, you forget it, you have it locked. Same thing with exposure. Do this in manual. Don't do anything auto because the camera will give you slightly different exposures throughout. So keep everything locked. Next photo is right here. And this is the one I actually took my exposure reading off of because the tin roof was giving me some specular highlights. So I was around this area, but I was focusing on the barn when I was getting my exposure set, just to make sure that everything stayed within reason. Next frame, and again, we're just working our way through this scene. Next frame, and then one to finish it up. I overshoot panoramics, so of course I've got a little bit of the tree in to the right that I don't want in the final picture. So that gives me a little bit of working room so I can really fine-tune how I crop this. It's not the easiest thing in the world to imagine that final crop, but we kind of run through this scene here, and this is 7 frames. So what we do we come down here to the film strip and we do shift. After we select one of them, we shift and select the other. That selects this whole row here. So make sure that everything that you want in this pano is highlighted here. And then you are going to right click on any one of the pictures, and that's fine. And then we're going to come up this menu list to photo merge. And as you hover over that, you have HDR, which is high dynamic range. You have a panorama, which is what we're doing, or an HDR panorama. And we'll do an HDR later on, but basically that's blending the same composition with multiple exposures, so you get a lot of workability in the tonal ranges throughout. But in this situation, we're going to be dealing with a panorama. So we left click on the panorama, and it's going to bring up this dialog box. It says it's creating a panoramic preview. Hopefully the video is holding, because this does tax the computer, and I'm running the video through the computer. So hopefully all of this is making it in the audio. Okay, so those 7 images that we saw have now been stitched together into this pano. And you can tell if I had not had everything level, we would have actually seen this thing stepped down. We don't want to do that by any stretch. We want to make sure that everything is nice and level. That gives us more ability to crop the way that we want to. If we ended up shooting really high here and really low here, that high point is going to be where we are going to have to deal with that bottom crop. So that cropped through the barn. So I overshot a little bit at the bottom, overshot a little bit at the top, I overshot a little bit to the right. I pretty much knew that this was where I wanted the left-hand side because this tree is rising. I gave myself just a little bit of room here, but I want to catch that edge where it's rising, so it gives you the impression that that just keeps on going. A little compositional trick. But you can select a projection, and basically by hitting these buttons here, it gives you an idea of what we're looking for. Spherical is one, and why they named them these I don't necessarily know, but I do always go through and just see which one works best for the scene. We went to cylindrical. It's not going to completely rebuild everything, it just changed it. And what this did is it gave me a little bit of a stretch top to bottom. For this, I kind of like that. So I'll probably use spherical, but let's look and see what perspective is. Okay, perspective warp is basically taking into account there's an arc to the camera and how the pictures are done. This is really handy when you are dealing with architecture. With this one, you see the way it stretches the closer in edges. We would have to kind of crop a little bit deeper into the middle. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. In this situation, though, because the barn is my main subject, perspective seems to shrink it. So I'm okay not having that perspective correction. So I like cylindrical, and you see that it makes the barn a little bit more prevalent in the scene, and to me that feels better. This already looks like what I had envisioned. You can come down here and do auto crop, and what that's going to do is it's going to automatically crop to the largest picture that it can possibly do. But you can see here, because I had everything so leveled out on the tripod, there is actually just a couple of little steps right through here you can kind of see at the bottom. And I mean, it's really hard to make out. But if we do auto crop, you see it just straightens everything out. It goes with the narrowest crop. Well, it's a poor choice of words. It goes with the crop to the point where the most inset blank pixels are. So it eliminates all the blank pixels, and in this situation, because I took the time to set this up in camera correctly, I only lost a few pixels here at the bottom, which I am not worried about at all. If you have a picture that you're not real sure how it's going to look like edited, you have the option of doing auto settings here. And that's what Lightroom would do to it, and that's actually pretty accurate and pretty close to what I'm going to do with it. If we didn't do the auto crop and we wanted to do the generative fill, in this situation it's not needed, but we could do fill edges and it's going to generate the areas that don't have any pixels. But again, I shot this very purposefully. I don't need to do that. It's not a fantastic option. So I am very happy with the auto crop. I don't need to create a stack, and that just groups these pictures together in a stack for later on. That's not something that I ever really use. You can manipulate how things kind of look with this boundary warp thing. Honestly, I don't think I've ever used that, so I just leave it at 0. It'd probably be very handy if you're shooting on a wider angle lens, wider than 50 millimeters. But this was shot, let's see, at 120 millimeters. So there's not a whole lot of perspective distortion that I need to mess with. So I'm really happy with how this works. And we've got cylindrical, auto crop, and all you have to do is hit merge. It's going to add to the tasks, and it's going to take it a minute depending on your machine speed. And again, I hope I'm keeping audio here because this is taxing on my machine, which is now about a decade old. It still does what I need it to do outside of some video stuff. And it can take a while. I've actually had an 11 frame panorama take about 30 minutes to do. This one won't take that long. I have upgraded the memory. I'm running on a 32-bit RAM processor, but it does take a while to stitch through this panoramic image. And what it's doing, it is looking for all the things that are overlapping in the pictures. And it gave you a rough idea, but it is really going through and probably masking areas and making them overlap correctly. So it does take it a while, and again, I'm shooting with a 50 megapixel camera. So we've got 50 megapixel images times 7 that are being processed and worked with. It just takes a while. It was a whole lot quicker on my 5D3, which was a 22 megapixel, something like that. So it went a whole lot quicker. But here we've got this. So for 750 megapixel frames being put together, I'm not unhappy with the speed that it took. And here is what we've got. Again, it is unprocessed. One thing I did forget to mention though, we'll go into develop for this, and this is something that always just, it is automatic on my import, but I just want to make sure that we have this covered. I haven't done any alterations at all, but one thing that I do have set up to do automatically is remove the chromatic aberrations and enable profile corrections. I shot this on 70 to 200, and this was all covered on one of the earlier episodes of Tuesday's Tips. So this was all covered. This is automatic. I apologize, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but you do want to make sure that you do this because the profile corrections will remove the vignetting. And the vignetting that is natural to a lens, while not really visible individual frames, will give you some weird effects when you're stitching it together. You'd end up with a little bit of vignetting here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and this just makes sure that you've got a nice clean image all the way around. So that's pretty much how we build the panoramic image. Go back here to the main screen. There's not a whole lot to it. Like I said, it is self-explanatory. I just got creative one day and decided I was going to shoot a pano, came home, figured out how to work it through Lightroom, found it to be very easy, but I wanted to at least give you an idea of what to look for. But the most important thing is how you shoot this in the field. And you want to make sure your tripod is level. You want to make sure that when the camera moves through its arch, that it stays level. And it's not something where it's doing this number, because you'll end up with some really weird effects. You can handhold, but for me, I prefer a tripod because I usually end up shooting 2 or 3 variations of the pano for different lighting just to make sure that everything is even. That is very easy to do on a tripod because all I do is bring it back to start position and start running through everything multiple times. It's very simple to do. Hand holding makes it a little bit more difficult. I also like the sharper images from using a tripod, and that's something we can talk about at another point. But that pretty much brings us to the end of this week's Tuesday's Tips. I hope you found it valuable and informative. I hope it allows you to go out and shoot some panoramics of your own. It's a really great way of doing photos, and it gives it a very, very high resolution. If you're shooting with a lower resolution camera and you're wanting to do a scene really big on a wall and you know it's going to be that way, do this type of image. You blend even 10 megapixel image over the course of, say, 15, 20 frames, and you can stack these, 5, come under 5, and then 5 over here, and then 5 under here. It's a little bit more complex to do, but as you get used to panos, that's not a big deal to do, but you end up with a huge image that can be printed very big natively without having to up-res it. So panoramic photography is something that is very useful and handy for a lot of different reasons. So thank you for joining today, and don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're interested in doing mentorships, I'll leave a link for that in the bottom. We can do that virtually or in person. Until next week, I hope everybody has some great camera adventures and happy shooting and happy editing. We'll see you next week.